You have probably heard of the Men in Black from the movies. They are cool secret agents who fight aliens and save the world, but the real story of the Men in Black is much stranger and much scarier. It has nothing to do with a secret government agency that protects us. The real story involves witnesses to UFO sightings who are visited by terrifying, strange men. These men do not seem human, and their only goal is to silence people. This is not a new story. It has been happening for decades. The accounts are chillingly similar, even when they come from people who have never met. So today we are going to look at the real Men in Black. We are going to examine the eyewitness accounts that are not just stories. We will dig into the history, the patterns, and the terrifying reality of what happens when you see something you are not supposed to see. Forget the movies, this is the real deal. Our story starts not in the present day, but way back in 1947. This was the year the modern UFO era really began with Kenneth Arnold's famous sighting. Just a few days after that sighting, an event happened that would give birth to the legend of the Men in Black. It is known as the Mory Island incident. Two men named Harold Dahl and Fred Crisman were on a patrol boat near Mory Island in Washington. They were collecting logs that had fallen into the water. Dahl claimed they saw 6 strange, donut-shaped aircraft in the sky. One of them seemed to be in trouble, sputtering and dropping metallic debris. This debris rained down on their boat, damaging it and unfortunately killing their dog. Dahl managed to take some pictures of the objects before they flew away. He also collected samples of the strange, slag-like metal that had fallen from the sky. This is where the story goes from a simple UFO sighting to something much darker. The next morning, Dahl said he was visited by a man in a black suit. This was not a normal visitor, not a government agent, not a police officer. The man was driving a black 1947 Buick sedan, which was a brand new car at the time. He met Dahl at a local diner for breakfast. Dahl said the man knew everything about his sighting from the day before. He described the entire event in perfect detail, as if he had been there himself. The man then gave Dahl a simple, chilling warning. He told him not to talk about what he saw. He said that if Dahl cared about his family, he would forget the entire thing ever happened. The implication was clear: silence or face the consequences. Dahl was terrified, and he took the threat seriously. The man in the black suit was the first of his kind, the original Man in Black. The story then gets even more complicated. Dahl's boss, Fred Crisman, was initially skeptical of the whole thing, but he eventually went to the island to see the debris for himself. He confirmed that something strange had definitely happened there. The story reached a man named Kenneth Arnold, the same pilot whose sighting had kicked off the UFO craze. Arnold was investigating UFO reports, and he flew to Washington to check out Dahl's story. He met with Dahl and Crisman, who seemed genuinely scared. Arnold was a respected businessman and pilot, not a man prone to wild tales. He brought in 2 Air Force intelligence officers, Lieutenant Frank Brown and Captain William Davidson, to help investigate. They interviewed Dahl and Crisman and collected samples of the metal debris. The officers were flying back to their base in a B-25 bomber with the evidence, but the plane never made it. It crashed, killing both Brown and Davidson. The official report said it was an engine fire, a tragic accident, but to those involved in the Mory Island story, it seemed like something more sinister. It felt like the warning Dahl received was coming true. The press called the metal fragments a hoax, and the Air Force concluded the same. Harold Dahl later confessed that the whole story was a lie, a joke that got out of hand. But many people believe he was forced to say that. They believe the Men in Black got to him and made him retract his story to protect his family. So was the Mory Island incident a hoax? Or was it the first real encounter with the Men in Black, a warning that silenced a witness and led to the deaths of 2 military officers? We will probably never know for sure, but it set the stage for decades of similar encounters. The idea of a man in a black suit silencing UFO witnesses entered the public consciousness, and it would not be long before he appeared again. The next major figure in the Men in Black story is a man named Albert K. Bender. In the early 1950s, Bender was a big deal in the world of UFO research. He was not a witness himself, but he was a collector of stories. He ran an organization called the International Flying Saucer Bureau, or IFSB. It was a club for people interested in UFOs, and it grew incredibly popular. It had members all over the world who would send him reports of sightings. Bender was connecting the dots, trying to piece together the puzzle of what these flying saucers were. He published a small magazine called Space Review, where he shared his findings. In 1953, Bender claimed he had figured it out. He said he had discovered the truth about UFOs, where they came from and why they were here. He was so confident that he wrote an article to be published in the next issue of his magazine. It was going to be a huge revelation. But the article was never published. Just before it went to print, Bender's life changed forever. He claimed he was visited by 3 men in black suits. They were not from the government, they were something else. He said they floated through his door, their eyes glowing like light bulbs. They did not speak but communicated with him telepathically. They confirmed that he had figured out the truth, but they told him he could not publish it. They warned him that if he did, he would face serious harm. They gave him information that terrified him to his very core. Bender was so shaken by this experience that he immediately shut down his entire organization. He stopped publishing his magazine and told all his members that he was ordered to stop. He wrote a final chilling message in the last issue of Space Review. He warned other researchers to be careful. He said, "We advise those engaged in saucer work to please be very cautious." It was a cryptic but terrifying message to the community. For years, Albert Bender remained silent. He refused to talk about what the 3 men told him. The mystery of what he discovered and what they did to him became a legend in ufology. What could be so important that these beings would personally intervene to stop it from being published? Years later, in 1962, Bender finally published a book called Flying Saucers and the 3 Men. Everyone hoped it would finally reveal the secret. But the book was strange and confusing. It described the men in black as shadowy alien beings who lived in an underground base in Antarctica. He said they harvested a chemical from seawater and that they could take on human form. It was a bizarre story that many people in the UFO community found hard to believe. Many felt the book was a deliberate piece of disinformation, that the real secret was still hidden, and Bender was either too scared to tell it or was forced to write a confusing story to throw people off the track. Whatever the truth is, Bender's story cemented the image of the men in black. They were not just guys in suits, they were strange, non-human entities with glowing eyes and supernatural abilities. They were the enforcers of a cosmic secret, and they would use fear and intimidation to protect it at all costs. The phenomenon did not stop with Bender. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, the reports continued to come in. Witnesses to UFOs, from ordinary people to pilots and police officers, would report being visited shortly after their sighting. The visitors were always the same. They were men, usually in groups of 2 or 3. They always wore black suits, black hats, and black sunglasses, even at night. Their clothing was often described as being too perfect, too clean, and sometimes out of style, like a new suit from a decade ago. They drove large black cars, usually Cadillacs or Lincolns. The cars were always spotless and often looked like vintage models, but in brand new condition. Witnesses said the cars sometimes appeared and disappeared silently. They would pull up with no engine sound and leave just as quietly. But the most disturbing part was the men themselves. Their appearance was just slightly off. Their skin was often described as incredibly pale, or sometimes oddly tan, with a plastic or waxy texture. Their facial features were sometimes described as Asian-like or Oriental, even when it was clear they were not of Asian descent. They had high cheekbones and thin lips. They rarely smiled or showed any emotion at all. Their movements were stiff and robotic. They walked and gestured like puppets or automatons. Their speech was also strange. It was often monotone or had an odd lilting cadence, as if they were learning to speak. They used slang incorrectly or spoke in an overly formal, stilted way. It was clear that English was not their first language or that they were not human at all. And then there were the eyes. Witnesses often reported that the men in black had large, strange eyes that made them uncomfortable. Sometimes they were described as bulging or thyroid-like. Other times they were just empty, dark pools with no emotion. The questions they asked were also bizarre. They would often display an incredible, almost impossible knowledge of the witness's life. They knew details that only the witness or their close family would know. They knew about their sighting, even if the witness had told no one. but at the same time, they seemed completely ignorant about common everyday things. They would be confused by simple objects like a pen or a spoon. One witness reported that a man in black was fascinated by a bowl of jello. He asked what it was for and poked at it as if he had never seen food before. Their goal was always the same: to get the witness to stop talking. They would demand any evidence, like photos or physical samples. They would issue vague but terrifying threats. They would mention the witness's family, their job, their health, implying they could take it all away. They never used physical violence. They did not have to. The fear they created was purely psychological. The strangeness of the encounter, the impossible knowledge, and the subtle threats were enough to silence most people permanently. One of the most famous and detailed cases is that of Dr. Herbert Hopkins. In 1976, Hopkins was a respected family doctor in Maine. He was also acting as a consultant for a UFO case involving a man who claimed to have been abducted. One evening, Hopkins was home alone when the phone rang. The man on the other end identified himself as the vice president of a New Jersey UFO research organization. He asked if he could come and talk to Hopkins about the case he was working on. Hopkins agreed, and the man said he was in the area and would be right over. Hopkins hung up the phone and walked over to the back door to turn on the porch light. As he reached the door, he saw a man already walking up the steps. There was no car in the driveway, and it was impossible for the man to have gotten there so quickly. Hopkins let the man in, and his strange appearance immediately put the doctor on edge. The man was dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit with a black tie and a crisp white shirt. He wore a black hat, which he took off inside, revealing a completely bald head. He had no eyebrows and no eyelashes. His skin was a dead white color like a corpse, and he had bright ruby red lips that looked like they were painted on. The man sat down and began to speak in a flat, robotic monotone. He talked about the abduction case Hopkins was investigating, showing intimate knowledge of the details. Then the conversation took a very strange turn. The man in black told Hopkins that the abductee, a man named David Stevens, had 2 coins in his pocket. He asked Hopkins to take a coin out of his own pocket. Hopkins pulled out a penny. The man told him to hold the penny in his hand and watch it. As Hopkins stared at the coin, it began to change. It turned from copper to a silver color, then it became blurry and fuzzy, and then it just vanished into thin air. The man in black calmly told Hopkins, "Neither you nor Stevens will ever see that coin again." It was a demonstration of power, a clear and terrifying message. The man then told Hopkins to destroy all the research he had on the UFO case. He stood up, his voice slowing down as if he were a machine running out of power. He said, "My energy is running low, must go now, goodbye." He walked stiffly to the door and down the steps and disappeared into the night. Dr. Hopkins was petrified. He immediately went to his files, erased all the tapes of his interviews and burned all of his notes. He never spoke of the case or his visitor for years. The encounter was so profoundly strange and frightening that it completely ended his involvement in UFO research. The Hopkins case is a classic for a reason. It contains all the hallmark elements of a man in black encounter: the strange appearance, the impossible speed of arrival, the intimate knowledge, the demonstration of paranormal power, and the effective silencing of a witness. This was not a government agent. This was something else entirely. Another famous case from that era is that of Woodrow Derenberger. In November of 1966, Derenberger was a sewing machine salesman driving home from work on Interstate 77 near Parkersburg, West Virginia. This was during a famous series of sightings of a creature that would become known as Mothman. The area was a hotbed of strange activity. As Derenberger drove, a strange object that looked like an old-fashioned kerosene lamp chimney flew alongside his truck. It then swerved in front of him and forced him to stop. A man got out of the object and walked towards him. Derenberger said the man looked perfectly normal, just a man with a tan and a dark coat. The man smiled at him. He did not speak out loud, but Derenberger heard his voice clearly in his head. The man introduced himself as Indrid Cold. He told Derenberger not to be afraid, that he only wanted to ask a few questions. He asked about the nearby city of Parkersburg. The questions were simple, like, "What do you call that place?" After a brief conversation, Indrid Cold told Derenberger that they would see him again. He then got back in his craft, and it took off straight up at an incredible speed. This encounter is a bit different from a classic Man in Black story. Indrid Cold was not overtly menacing, and he did not wear a black suit. But the telepathic communication and the connection to a high strangeness area link it to the broader phenomenon. The story became a major part of the Mothman legend, as written about by researcher John Keel. Keel himself reported being harassed by men in black during his investigation in West Virginia. He described them as strange, awkward men who would ask bizarre questions and follow him. Keel was one of the first researchers to suggest that the men in black were not aliens from outer space. He proposed that they and UFOs themselves were ultra-terrestrials, beings from another dimension that coexists with our own. He believed they were deceptive entities, cosmic tricksters who could manipulate our reality. They were not here to help us. They were here to confuse and mislead us. This theory helps explain their strangeness, their lack of knowledge about everyday objects, their robotic movements, their weird speech. It all makes more sense if they are not from our world and are trying, poorly, to imitate human beings. So what are we to make of all this? Are these just stories, elaborate hoaxes, or the product of overactive imaginations? The sheer number of accounts and the consistency of the details suggest something more is going on. Let's break down the evidence and the possible explanations. First, let's consider the skeptical viewpoint. The most common explanation is that these are simply government agents. During the Cold War, the Air Force and other intelligence agencies were genuinely concerned about UFOs. They worried they could be advanced Soviet aircraft, or that public panic over aliens could be a threat to national security. The Air Force ran projects like Project Blue Book to investigate UFO sightings. It is plausible that they would send agents, perhaps from the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, or AFOSI, to interview witnesses. These agents would want to collect evidence and encourage witnesses to be discreet. They would be men in conservative suits, driving government-issued sedans. This explains some of the elements: the black suits, the black cars, and the desire for silence. However, it does not explain the high strangeness. Government agents do not have glowing eyes or corpse-like skin. They do not teleport onto a witness's porch or dematerialize coins. They would also likely have proper identification, something the men in black almost never provide. And while an agent might be intimidating, the specific brand of bizarre psychological terror used by the men in black seems beyond the scope of a standard military debriefing. The government wants information. The men in black want to create fear and confusion. Another skeptical explanation is psychological. Many of these encounters happen late at night to people who are already stressed or frightened from having seen a UFO. It's possible some of these are hypnagogic hallucinations. These are vivid, dreamlike experiences that can occur as someone is falling asleep or waking up. Dr. Herbert Hopkins himself later wondered if his experience might have been a vivid dream. The problem is, his experience involved physical actions like burning his research after the event. Other theories point to confabulation, where the mind creates false memories to fill in gaps, or the power of suggestion, where people who have heard stories about men in black subconsciously project that image onto a strange visitor. This is certainly possible in some cases. The men in black have become a part of our modern folklore, a cultural archetype of the scary stranger. But it does not explain the very first cases, like Harold Dull's, which happened before the legend was widely known. It also does not account for the sheer physical detail and consistency across decades of reports. And it definitely does not explain cases with multiple witnesses, or when physical evidence like the dematerialized coin is part of the story. So if they are not government agents, and they are not just in our heads, what are they? This is where we enter the realm of the truly strange. The most popular theory is that they are connected to the UFOs themselves. They are either the aliens or beings that work for the aliens. This would explain their non-human appearance and abilities. They are here to cover up the alien presence on Earth, to police their own and make sure humans do not learn the truth. This is the version of the story that the Men in Black movies popularized, but the real accounts paint them less as an organized agency and more as weird, almost malfunctioning enforcers. Another theory, as mentioned before, is John Keel's ultra-terrestrial hypothesis, that they are interdimensional beings. This theory is attractive because it covers all the weirdness. If a being from another dimension tries to manifest in our reality, it might not get it quite right. The suit is a little off, the car is too old, the speech is stilted, the skin looks like plastic. They are like a bad copy of a human being. Their paranormal tricks, like teleportation and telepathy, would also be possible for a being that operates on different physical laws than we do. Their goal might not even be understandable in human terms. Then there is an even stranger theory, the idea of the tulpa or thought form. This is a concept from Tibetan mysticism. A tulpa is a being that is created purely by the power of the mind. Through intense concentration and belief, a person can supposedly manifest a physical entity. The theory goes that the men in black are not real in the objective sense. They are psychic projections created by the intense fear and focus of the UFO witness. When you see a UFO, your mind is in a heightened state of shock and awe. The collective unconscious, filled with archetypes of dark, suited government agents and demonic figures, projects an entity into your reality. This would explain why they know so much about the witness. They are literally a part of the witness's own psyche. It would also explain their bizarre, dreamlike quality. This is a wild theory, but in the world of high strangeness, it is one that some researchers take seriously. It suggests that reality itself is more pliable than we think. Let's look at the numbers, as much as we can in a field like this. There are no official statistics, of course, but researchers who have compiled cases have found remarkable patterns. One study by researcher Nick Redfern noted that a significant percentage of men in black reports come from witnesses who claim to have physical evidence of their UFO encounter. This suggests the men in black are not just interested in silencing talkers, they're interested in confiscating proof. Another pattern is the geographical clustering of reports. Areas with a high number of UFO sightings, like West Virginia in the 60s or the Hudson Valley in the 80s, also tend to have a high number of men in black reports. This supports the idea that the two phenomena are directly linked. Where the sources go, the strange men in black suits seem to follow. We can also look at the evolution of the phenomenon over time. The classic men in black encounters peaked in the 1950s through the 1970s. In the modern era, the reports have changed. While the classic suit-wearing figures still appear occasionally, there are new forms of harassment. Witnesses now report strange phone calls with metallic, synthesized voices. They report their computers being hacked and their files being deleted remotely. They report being followed by black, unmarked helicopters. This is a common element in modern abduction cases and cattle mutilation investigations. Some researchers call these men in black of a different color. The methods have updated with the technology, but the goal is the same: intimidation and silence. Could this be the government after all? The use of helicopters and computer hacking sounds much more like a modern intelligence agency than a creature from another dimension. Perhaps the phenomenon is a mix of things. Perhaps some men in black are government agents, while others are something else entirely. The waters are so muddied with disinformation, hoaxes, and genuine high strangeness that it is almost impossible to separate the threads. That might even be the point. Maybe their ultimate goal is not just to silence witnesses, but to create so much confusion and absurdity around the topic of UFOs that no one will ever take it seriously. If that is the case, they have been remarkably successful. Let's consider a few more cases to understand the sheer strangeness of it all. In the 1960s, a family on Long Island reported seeing a UFO. Shortly after, a man came to their door. He was a very large man, well over 6 feet tall, dressed in a black suit. He asked to come in and talk about their recent experience. The family was scared, but let him in. The man did not sit down. He just stood in their living room asking questions in a monotone voice. The strangest part was his skin. The family said he had a bizarre dark tan, but it was patchy, and under it his skin looked almost green. After a few minutes, he seemed to have trouble breathing. He started wheezing and choking, and then he ran out of the house and disappeared down the street. The family was left terrified and confused. Was he an alien who could not handle our atmosphere? Another case involves a woman who was visited by a man in black after she took a picture of a strange light in the sky. The man who came to her door was unnaturally thin and pale. He asked for the photograph, but she had already sent it to a lab to be developed. The man became agitated. He told her that the world is not ready for this kind of thing. He then looked at her pet dog, which started whimpering and hiding. The man said, "That's a nice dog. It would be a shame if anything happened to it." He then left. The next day, the dog was gone from her fenced backyard. She never saw it again. These stories are not just in the United States, they are reported all over the world. In the United Kingdom, a man named Timothy Green Beckley, a UFO researcher, has documented many men in black cases. One involved a man who saw a low-flying, silent triangular craft. 2 days later, 2 men in black suits came to his workplace. They knew his name and where he worked, even though he had told no one about the sighting. They interviewed him in a back room. They told him that what he saw was a top-secret military craft and that he was to never speak of it again, or he would be charged with treason. This sounds like a classic government intimidation case, but the witness said the men's faces were like wax masks with no expression at all. And when they left, his co-worker asked who they were. The witness said they were government men, but the co-worker said they didn't look like any government men I've ever seen, they looked like undertakers. In Brazil, the famous Virginia incident of 1996 involved a crashed UFO and alien bodies being recovered by the Brazilian military. Many local witnesses who saw the creatures were later visited by men in dark suits. These men, believed to be from American intelligence agencies, offered them money and threatened them to keep quiet. Again, we see the line blurring between government agents and something more. Are American agents operating in Brazil to cover up a crashed saucer? Or are these non-human entities who can appear anywhere in the world? The problem with the men in black is that there is no hard evidence, there are no bodies, no crashed cars, no fingerprints left behind. All we have are the stories, but stories can be powerful. When hundreds of people from different countries and different decades all tell the same bizarre story, you have to start paying attention. You have to ask what is really going on. The phenomenon forces us to question the nature of reality itself. It suggests that there are forces at work in our world that we do not understand. It suggests that we are being watched and sometimes policed by entities unknown. The men in black represent the ultimate gatekeepers of a forbidden truth. They are the creepy delivery men of cosmic censorship. Their message is always simple. You saw nothing, you know nothing, forget it. Let's think about the psychology of the encounter. The experience is designed to be traumatizing. It is a form of gaslighting on a paranormal scale. The men in black make you question your own sanity. They show you things that are impossible, like a vanishing coin. Then they tell you to forget what you saw. This creates a deep psychological conflict. You know that what you experienced was real, but you are being forced to deny it, not just to others, but to yourself. This is why many witnesses remain silent for years, or even for the rest of their lives. The fear is not just of physical harm, but of losing their minds. It is the fear of being labeled crazy. The men in black ensure that if you do talk, your story will be so strange that no one will believe you anyway. They win either way. You either stay silent out of fear or you speak out and are dismissed as a lunatic. It is a perfect system of control, and it has been working for over 70 years. So where do we stand today? Are the men in black still out there? The reports have slowed down, but they have not stopped. They just seem to have adapted. Instead of a black Cadillac, maybe it is a black SUV. Instead of a knock on the door, maybe it's a strange email from an untraceable address. The core of the phenomenon remains. Unexplained sightings are followed by strange encounters with intimidating figures who want to suppress the information. The mystery is as deep as ever. We are left with a collection of deeply unsettling stories that defy easy explanation. They are not just stories. They are eyewitness accounts from credible people whose lives were changed forever by a visit from a man in a black suit. Whether they are government spooks, aliens, interdimensional beings, or psychic projections, their effect is real. They are the scary, silent guardians of the greatest secret in the world. What is that secret? Is it that aliens are visiting us? Or is it something even more profound? Is it that reality is not what we think it is? The men in black do not want us to ask these questions. Their entire purpose is to stop us from looking behind the curtain. But the stories are out there, the witnesses have spoken, and as long as there are strange things in the sky, there will likely be strange men on the ground working to keep us in the dark. So the next time you look up and see something you cannot explain, be careful who you tell. You never know who might come knocking on your door, and you might not like what they have to say. The legacy of the men in black is one of fear and silence. It is a testament to the power of the unknown. They represent a fundamental human fear, the fear that we are not alone, and that the ones who are out there are not friendly. They are the modern equivalent of old folklore tales about demons or fairies who would steal people away or punish them for knowing too much. They are a new kind of monster for a new age. But unlike monsters in storybooks, these ones leave a trail of real, terrified witnesses. Their stories are a warning to all of us. There are some things we are not meant to know, and there are men in black who will make sure it stays that way. The history of this phenomenon is a history of intimidation. From Harold Dahl on Mory Island in 1947 to Dr. Herbert Hopkins in his office in 1976. The pattern is undeniable. The methods are consistent. Let's revisit the core characteristics one more time to really let them sink in. The black suit, often ill-fitting or old-fashioned. The black car, often a vintage model in perfect condition. The pale, waxy skin and emotionless face. The stiff, robotic movements and strange, monotone voice. The display of impossible knowledge about the witness, combined with ignorance of simple, everyday things. The demonstration of paranormal abilities, and the final chilling warning to remain silent. No single explanation covers all of these elements perfectly. The government agent theory fails to explain the paranormal aspects. The psychological theory fails to explain the physical consistency and multiple witness cases. The extraterrestrial theory fails to explain why they would be so bad at pretending to be human. John Keel's ultra-terrestrial theory comes closest to explaining the high strangeness. It paints a picture of a world far more complex and bizarre than we can imagine. A world where other forms of intelligence can bleed through into our own. A world where the rules of reality can be bent. But it is just a theory. It is an attempt to put a framework around something that is fundamentally incomprehensible. The truth is, we do not know what the men in black are. We only know what they do. They enforce a cosmic silence. They are the agents of amnesia. And their long, strange history is written in the terrified accounts of those who dared to see something they were not supposed to. These accounts are not just stories. They are data points in a mystery that lies at the very edge of human understanding. As we conclude, remember that the phenomenon is ongoing. People today still report these encounters. The world of ufology is filled with whispers of modern-day men in black activity. The fear they instill is as potent as it ever was. So the question remains for you to ponder. If you saw a craft from another world, would you tell anyone? And if you did, what would you do when the black car pulls up to your house silently in the middle of the night? It's a question that thankfully most of us will never have to answer. But for the unlucky few who have, the answer has been made very clear for them. Silence is survival.